I didn't know that one Christmas gift would make me question everything about my family. If I had known, I would have never walked into that house. It was just supposed to be another Christmas, but it wasn't. No, it was the moment my son became a joke in front of everyone, his own family. And I almost didn't see it until it was too late. Let me take you back to that Christmas Eve, the one where everything changed. We had gathered at my in-laws' house, as we did every year. The lights were twinkling, the tree was a bit too big for the space, and the smell of cinnamon and pine filled the air. It was supposed to be magical. It always was, right? We were a close family, at least I thought we were. My husband and I, along with our 2 children, would arrive early to help with dinner. The kids ran around, too excited to stay still, while the grown-ups sipped wine and chatted about everything and nothing. Every year, I looked forward to this, to the smiles, the laughter, the warmth. But that year was different.
Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We have a goal of reaching 1,000 subscribers, and your subscription is essential for us to get there. Don't miss the chance to be part of this journey and help us bring more amazing content like this. Thank you.
This year, my son was going to get the gift he had been dreaming of, a shiny new iPad, just like the other grandkids. My daughter, who was a little older, was already buzzing with excitement, her eyes wide as she imagined the gift she would receive. I had seen the other gifts being wrapped and placed under the tree. iPads, expensive gadgets, the kind of things that made my heart sink because I knew what we could afford. But my son, though, he didn't ask for much. He was humble, always grateful for the little things. So when I asked him, he only wanted one thing, a simple gift, a toy car, a book, anything really, as long as it was something he could hold and play with. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this Christmas wouldn't be like the others. And that gut feeling only grew as the day went on. Dinner was served, the laughter was louder, but my son, my sweet, innocent boy, he didn't look happy. He was sitting at the end of the table, surrounded by the other grandkids. The moment arrived. It was time for gifts. One by one, the other children ripped open their presents, their faces lighting up with joy as they pulled out the latest gadgets, the newest phones, the best video games, everything that made me feel, well, a little inadequate. But what hurt the most wasn't seeing the gifts themselves. It was watching my son's face. When it was his turn, my heart sank. I handed him a wrapped gift, nothing too fancy, just a used coloring book. A book that had seen better days, with pages missing, scribbled on, and well-worn edges. I felt embarrassed. I wanted to hide it, but I couldn't. It was the best I could do. I could already feel the eyes on us. The laughter started. One of the older grandkids said, "What's this? A secondhand book? It's like a joke." And that's when I saw the look on my son's face. His smile faded, his eyes glossed over, and he tried so hard to hide his disappointment, but it was too obvious. The room fell silent for a split second before the laughter picked up again, louder this time. "Oh, come on, he's just a second-hand boy anyway. Should have expected something like that." I froze. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The words were cutting, sharp. And it wasn't just the kids. It was the adults, too. They laughed. They made fun of him. My son. My little boy who deserved better than this. Who deserved to be treated with kindness, dignity, respect. I stood there frozen, too angry to speak, too hurt to move. I wanted to yell, to shout at them all, to make them stop. But all I could do was watch as my son, red-faced and embarrassed, slumped in his chair, trying to hold back his tears. My heart shattered. I didn't recognize my own family in that moment. This wasn't just a bad gift. This was something much worse. This was cruelty. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I swallowed them down. I had to be strong for him. I had to protect him. I couldn't just let this go. But what could I do? What could I do in front of all these people? Are you seriously going to let them talk to him like that? My husband whispered, looking at me with disbelief. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but I could hear the anger underneath. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. I knew deep down that I couldn't stand by any longer. I had to act. For my son, for me, for our family. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I don't remember much. The dinner was served, people ate, and the conversation continued as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on than I was seeing. That night, when we got home, I went to tuck my son into bed. He was quiet. Too quiet, his little face still filled with that disappointment. But as I kissed him goodnight and tucked the covers around him, I noticed something strange. There, tucked inside the coloring book, of all places, was a folded piece of paper. I opened it and my hands shook as I read the note inside. I unfolded the note, my hands trembling as I read the messy handwriting. It wasn't much, just a few lines scribbled hastily, but the words hit me like a slap to the face. I'm sorry for what happened. I didn't have much, but I wanted to give you something special. Maybe you can see the value in it, even if they don't. I stared at the words, stunned. My heart sank. What was going on? Why would my son's gift have a note like this inside? And what was he trying to say? I sat there on his bed, the note still in my hands, feeling every ounce of guilt and confusion flood over me. The gift was secondhand, yes, but what if it wasn't about the book at all? What if it was about something deeper, something I had missed? I couldn't understand it. Was he trying to tell me something, or was this his way of coping with the humiliation he'd suffered earlier that evening? A tiny gesture, hidden in the most unlikely place, offering me a glimpse into something I had never considered before. My son was stronger than I ever gave him credit for. He wasn't upset about the book. He wasn't devastated by what everyone had said. No, he was trying to teach me something, even if it was hidden beneath his quiet exterior. He was showing me how to find value in things that others might overlook. As I looked at the note again, I began to realize something. My son wasn't bothered by the judgment. He was bothered by how I reacted to it. He had internalized their laughter, their words, but still, he found a way to turn it into something meaningful. He was teaching me a lesson I needed to learn. I had failed him, I realized. I failed to see what mattered. I had been so caught up in my own shame about the gift, about what I thought was good enough, that I hadn't stopped to think about how my son saw the world. He wasn't angry. He wasn't upset. He was resilient. The note, the scribbled words, it wasn't just a message for me. It was a message for everyone who had laughed at him. It was a reminder that things aren't always as they seem. That sheep gift, it was a lesson in humility, in empathy, in seeing the value in what others might discard. I had to do something. I couldn't just let this moment pass. I couldn't let this pass without giving my son the respect he deserved, without showing him how proud I was. I knew what I had to do. I stood up, the note still clutched in my hands, and walked out of his room. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew I had to take action. I couldn't let the cruelty of that night linger in his heart. Not anymore. I went to the living room, my pulse racing. The others were still there, talking and laughing as if nothing had happened, but I wasn't going to let this go. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. I need to talk to everyone, I said, my voice shaking but determined. They all turned to look at me, surprised by the sudden change in tone. My husband was sitting on the couch, his face softening when he saw the anger in my eyes. The rest of the family just stared at me, confused. I know we're all here to celebrate Christmas, but something happened tonight that I can't ignore anymore. I held up the note. This is what my son left inside his gift. And it's what I should have seen from the beginning. I failed to see his strength, his humility. I got caught up in my own shame about a second-hand gift. I looked around the room, my voice steady but fierce. It's not about the value of the gift. It never was. It's about how we treat each other. And tonight, we humiliated him. We laughed at him. And for that, I am sorry. But what's worse is that I allowed it to happen. There was silence. For the first time, they weren't laughing. They weren't making jokes. They were listening. And for a moment, I felt a rush of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Justice. I continued, feeling my resolve grow stronger with each word. My son may have gotten a second-hand gift, but he's not second-hand. He's worth more than all of the material things in this room put together. And if you can't see that, then maybe it's time for you to look at your own hearts. The tension was thick, heavy in the air, but I wasn't done. You may have laughed at him tonight, but I'm not laughing. Not anymore. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving them all behind. I knew I had made my point. I knew I had stood up for my son. And as I closed the door to my son's room, I looked at him, his innocent eyes wide, and smiled. He wasn't looking for apologies. He wasn't looking for validation. He had already figured out what really mattered. What he needed was me to stand with him, to stand up for him. And that's exactly what I did. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I knew there was more to this story, more to uncover, more to reveal. And I was going to make sure that I didn't let this go, because my son deserved better, and I wasn't going to let anyone forget that. The night dragged on, but my heart was no longer in it. The joy, the festive cheer, the laughter, it all felt like a distant echo. It wasn't until we were finally home, in the stillness of our own space, that I could process everything that had happened. As I lay in bed beside my husband, the silence between us was thick with unspoken words. We both knew what had to be said, but neither of us knew how to say it. He reached for my hand, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know what to do. When they started laughing, I thought it was just a joke, but it wasn't. I should have said something. I squeezed his hand, my thoughts swirling. It wasn't just a joke, and you should have said something. But I didn't either, did I? I didn't stand up for him like I should have. I let him sit there, humiliated, and I did nothing. We both knew that neither of us could undo the damage that had been done. I thought about my son, his quiet resilience, the way he had taken it all in stride. But it wasn't just about him. It was about me, and the part I played in allowing it to happen. I saw it too, I continued, my voice breaking. I saw how they looked at him, and I did nothing. You're not the only one at fault, he said softly. We both let it happen. The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't just the laughter or the gift. It was everything. The favoritism that had been there for years, the unspoken expectations, the constant comparison. They had always treated my son as less than, and somehow we had let it go on. My heart ached at the realization that I had been blind to it. The next morning, I woke up early, still replaying the events in my mind. The house was quiet, everyone still asleep. I went into my son's room, my heart heavy with guilt. He was still sleeping, his small face peaceful, unaware of the storm that had erupted the night before. I sat beside his bed, watching him, and in that moment I realized something important. My son didn't need to be fixed. He didn't need validation from anyone else. He was already whole. He had something that most people didn't: strength, the ability to rise above the cruel judgments of others. And he had a mother who was ready to fight for him, no matter what. But the question lingered in my mind. What now? What could I do to make this right? To show my son that his worth wasn't determined by what others thought of him? How could I change the course of the family dynamic to make sure he would never feel that way again? As the hours passed and the day unfolded, I realized that the answer wasn't going to come overnight. But what I could do was take a stand. For him. For me. For the family we had been and the family we could become. The tension that had loomed over the night before had not fully dissipated. But I knew that it was time for the next step. I couldn't let this go, not without confronting it head on. I made a decision then. This wasn't over. Not yet. I sat there in the quiet of the room, the weight of what I had just done settling on my shoulders. My son was asleep in his bed, blissfully unaware of the storm that had just been unleashed in the house. But I wasn't about to let this go. Not now, not ever. The anger still burned inside me, but it wasn't just about what had happened to my son anymore. It was about the years of unspoken tension, the favoritism that had always been there, the subtle jabs that no one had ever called out before. It was about the hurt that had festered quietly over time, building up like a pressure cooker ready to explode. I couldn't stay silent. I couldn't let them think that this was just another argument. No, this was different. This was the moment I took a stand, for my son, for myself, and for the future of our family. I heard them talking, their voices drifting from the living room. It was strange. There were no more laughs, no more jokes. Now it was all whispers. Whispers of regret. Whispers of confusion. They had never expected me to fight back, to stand up to them. I stood up from where I had been sitting, heart racing, and walked towards the living room. My footsteps echoed in the hallway, and with every step, I felt more certain. This wasn't just about my son anymore. It was about dismantling the years of silence, the unhealthy dynamics that had always existed under the surface. When I walked into the room, all eyes turned to me. My husband, still sitting on the couch, looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and guilt. The rest of the family was silent. There were no excuses, no apologies. They were all waiting for me to speak, for me to say what they knew I was going to say. I took a deep breath, holding my ground. I'm not going to pretend anymore. I'm not going to sit back and let this go unnoticed. This wasn't just about a gift. This was about the way you've treated him for years. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. The family members who had been so vocal earlier, the ones who had laughed at my son, were now looking at me like they had seen a ghost. And maybe in some ways they had. I wasn't the same person I had been when I first walked into that house hours ago. I was different now, stronger, more resolute, and no longer willing to let this happen to my child. I turned to my husband. "You were there too," I said softly, my voice breaking but firm. "You saw what they said, what they did. Why didn't you stand up for him?" He lowered his gaze, guilt written all over his face. I didn't know what to say. I thought it would pass. I thought you would handle it." I could feel the tears welling up again, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not until everything had been said. This isn't just about me handling it. This is about us handling it. This is about us protecting our son. And when you let them laugh at him like that, when you let them treat him like he was nothing, you failed him. We both failed him. There was a long pause. The guilt was thick in the air, suffocating. But it was also something else. A recognition that this wasn't something we could just sweep under the rug. This moment, this confrontation, was too big to ignore. Then I heard it. One voice, small, but loud enough to break through the tension. "I'm sorry." It was my mother-in-law, the one who had laughed the loudest, the one who had set this whole thing into motion. She was standing in the doorway, her face flushed with shame. She wasn't looking at me now, but at the floor, her eyes filled with regret. She said, "I didn't mean to hurt him. I didn't understand. I thought it was funny, but it wasn't." I see that now. For the first time that evening, I saw something in her eyes. Genuine remorse. It wasn't enough to fix the damage, but it was a start. A real apology. I stood there, processing her words. It wasn't easy for me to forgive, but I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't looking for a fight. I was looking for change, for accountability. And maybe, just maybe, I was getting it. My husband stood up, moving towards me. "I'm sorry too," he said quietly. "I should have stepped in. I should have been the one to stand up for him." The apology didn't erase the hurt, but it was a step forward. It was a step towards healing, towards reconciliation. And then, as if on cue, my son appeared at the doorway. He had heard us talking, and now he was standing there, rubbing his eyes, looking confused. He didn't understand what had happened. He didn't need to. But he was here, and somehow that made everything feel a little bit better. I knelt down in front of him, pulling him into a tight embrace. "I'm so sorry, baby," I whispered. "I should have been there for you." He didn't say anything at first, just held on to me. But then he pulled away slightly, looking up at me with those wide eyes of his. "It's okay, Mom," he said softly. "I'm fine. I know it wasn't my fault." I looked at him, my heart aching. He was so much stronger than I ever realized. In that moment, everything clicked. My son wasn't broken. He wasn't shattered by their words. He had been more resilient than I had given him credit for. He had found his own way of dealing with the hurt. He had given me the note, not because he needed me to fix it, but because he wanted me to see him for who he truly was. Not just a second-hand boy, but someone who could rise above all the cruelty. And as I stood up, holding his hand, I made a vow to myself. I wasn't going to let him face this world alone anymore. I wasn't going to let anyone treat him like that again. Not now, not ever. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps spread the word. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, share this video with them. Let's make sure no one ever feels like they're alone in situations like this. Also, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment below and share your own stories of standing up for someone you love. Let's start a conversation and support each other. And if you want to see more stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss out on any new videos.